And in Daniel chapter 6, verse 4, so the governors and satraps, that would be like we'd call county officials or something, sought to find some charge against Daniel concerning the kingdom, but they could find no charge or fault, because he was faithful, nor was there any error or fault found in him. Then these men said, we shall not find any charge against this Daniel unless we find it against him concerning the law of his God. We're going to have to do something. You're going to have to find it. Something has to do with his religion. And so they went before the king, and I'm going to kind of scan read right here. King Darius, live forever. And they said, we consulted together to establish a royal statute and to make a firm decree that whoever petitions God or man for 30 days, except you, O king, shall be cast into the den of lions. Of course, that got the king's ego up. Now, O king, establish the decree and sign the writing so that it cannot be changed, according to the law of the Medes and the Persians, which does not alter. Because you see, the Medes and the Persians had a law that once an order was signed, not even the person who signed it could contradict it, not even the king. Once a decree was signed, it had to be taken place, and you couldn't change your mind about it. Even if you'd changed your mind later, it still had to go just. Therefore, King Darius signed the written decree. Now, when Daniel knew that the writing was signed at this time, he could have been no more than in his early 20s, that the writing was signed, he went home, and in his upper room with his windows open, he didn't even shut the doors or windows, toward Jerusalem, he knelt down on his knees 3 times that day and prayed. Now, he wasn't just doing it to be defiant. It said he gave thanks before his God, as was his custom since he was a boy. All Daniel's life, since he was a little boy, he had been 3 times a day kneeling facing Jerusalem and praying. And even when this edict came out, he made the choice not to change. Now you can go back to the first chapter of Daniel. And in that very first chapter, I want to read verses 3 to 5. Then the king, now this is when they had first been brought into captivity, and at this point Daniel could not have been more than 16 or 17 years old. Then the king instructed Ashpenaz, the master of eunuchs, to bring some of the children of Israel, and some of the king's descendants, and some of the nobles, young men in whom there was no blemish, but good-looking, gifted in all wisdom, possessing knowledge, and quick to understand. Man, I wouldn't mind qualifying there myself when I was a teenager. No blemish, no scars or anything. Good-looking, gifted in all wisdom, possessing knowledge, and quick to understand, who had ability to serve in the king's palace, and whom they might teach the language and the literature of the Chaldeans. And the king appointed for them a daily provision of the king's delicacies and of the wine which he drank, and 3 years of training for them, so that at the end of that time they might serve before the king. But then let's look at verse 8. But Daniel purposed in his heart, this kid who could have been more than 17, and it said he was chosen, so that meant he was good looking. He had no blemish on his body anywhere. He was real good looking. He was real smart. He was sharp on the ball. And here this teenager said he purposed in his heart that he would not defile himself with a portion of the king's delicacies, nor with the wine which he drank. Therefore he requested of the chief of the eunuchs that he might not defile himself. Now here's a young man who stood to lose his life if he didn't obey the king. And as a 17-year-old boy, we'll just use that because he was somewhere there. He had already been chosen because he was so good looking and so smart. Chosen to be a big shot in the kingdom. All he had to do was, and man, chosen that he could have the same food the king did, eat just like the king did. And Daniel said, I'm not going to drink his wine, I'm not going to eat his pork. A choice. And I want to look at one more this morning, and they were three of Daniel's friends. Back in Daniel chapter 8. You know the story, but to emphasize some statements, I want to just scan read a little bit of it. The three Hebrew children, they were all friends of Daniel. They were all young men at this time. Just young men. And in the 3rd year of the reign of King Belshazzar, a vision appeared to him. And he said, no, I don't think this is not the one. I've got the wrong one here. The three Hebrew children. I wrote them for the wrong. Now, why did I do that? You know the reason I did that was because I was studying somewhere else in chapter 8. But I'll go ahead and tell the story. He made an image that nobody or that everybody had to bow before this image. And if at the sound of the music everybody bowed, what chapter is that? Somebody tell me right quick. What? Chapter 3. Chapter 3. I was studying chapter 8 and something else is what the deal was. Got them mixed in my mind. Yeah. And he made an image of gold. Isn't it very interesting? It was Nebuchadnezzar made the image of gold. Isn't it very interesting that Nebuchadnezzar started the times of the Gentiles with a huge image. And the times of the Gentiles will end when the beast of the end time makes another huge image. The times of the Gentiles started with an image with Nebuchadnezzar, and it will end with an image of the beast. Amen, during the tribulation period. But anyhow, everybody had to bow down. Well, these three young men wouldn't do it. And then it said in verse 8, therefore at that time certain Chaldeans came forward and accused the Jews. And then he told them there were certain Jews that wouldn't do it. And so he called these three young men. They were all friends of Daniel, and they had also been picked, being good looking and smart. And they had been picked along with Daniel to be big shots in the kingdom a little later. 3 years of training, eating at the king's table and everything. They had everything ahead of them, buddy. But when he called them, I don't know why they didn't bow. Down in verse 16. Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego, and the king had renamed them this. These were all Persian names, and they had Hebrew names, but he had changed their names because he intended for them to be big shots one day. They answered and said to the king, O Nebuchadnezzar, we have no need to answer you in this matter. He said, we don't even have to think about it. If that is the case, our God whom we serve is able to deliver us from the burning fiery furnace. And he will deliver us from your hand, O king. Now, you notice they didn't say that they were going to get delivered from the furnace. But you see, if they got burned up, they'd be delivered from his hand. They'd go to be with God, and they'd be completely out of his hand. But said, but if not, if he doesn't deliver them, let it be known to you, O king, that we do not serve your gods, nor will we worship the gold image which you have set up. You say, well, that would have been kind of a small thing. But the thing I wanted to point out here, these three young men, but this time couldn't have been more than in their early 20s. They had been chosen out of hundreds, along with Daniel, because they were so good looking, no blemishes in their body, smart, on the ball. And the king wanted to train them to be rulers along with him in the kingdom. They had everything to look forward to. 3 years of eating at the king's meat. Here's the same thing the kings did. And these three young men said, well, God can deliver us, but whether he does or not, we don't even have to pray about this, Nebuchadnezzar. We're not going to fall down and worship your gods, whether he delivers us or not. Now you talk about choices. My friend, we have people right here in this church that have never really made the choice to really serve God all out. And it kind of bothers me at times, and I pray for them. It especially bothers me when it's parents who have young children. Especially it bothers me then to see the examples that those children can see that will cause them by the time they're in their teens to have no regard really for the things of God. And we find that all across the nation. And in fact, the very ones that I had wanted to hear this morning are not even here this morning. They're somewhere else. But God said, go ahead with it anyhow. So there must be somebody here he wanted to hear it, and maybe some of those that are not here will get the tape and hear it. Making a choice. You know, it's been said that there's no greater test of a man's character, of a person's character, than the choices they make. The greatest test of a character is the choices they make. And in Hebrews chapter 11, I want to read verses 14 and 15 in closing. For they who say, those who say such things, that is like we've been reading, I'm going to serve God regardless, declare plainly that they seek a homeland. We're headed home. And I wrote a song years ago, some call it heaven, but I call it home. And it's being sung considerably lately, except all that they really butchered it up. Twice this week I happened to hear it being sung while I was on the station, and this one guy, he sung one verse that I wrote, and then he sung another verse that he wrote. And of course that's plagiarism. If I wanted to, I could tell him, look, you want to go to court or you want to settle this thing? And then of course all those singers, they tear the tunes up until you can hardly recognize the tunes, but it did come through. It did come through. But that was the reason I wrote it one time. Some call it heaven, but I call it home, because that's what it means to me. It said, they that take these stands, they're looking for a home. Glory to God. And it said, and truly, if they had called to mind that country from which they had come out, they would have had opportunity to return. And if you want to look back and see things that you've given up for God, and you desire them enough, it says God will tell you, okay, if you want that, go back to it. They could have an opportunity. Those 3 Hebrew children, they had an opportunity to go right ahead and eat the king's food, to go ahead and take 3 years of training, become big shots. Daniel had an opportunity. All he had to do was just quit praying, or at least shut the door. Nobody'd see him. Abraham didn't have to leave Ur. And what it says here, even after he got to Palestine, if he'd got to getting so homesick for Ur, he could have turned around and gone back. His choice wasn't taken away from him. Moses, out in the wilderness, probably any time he took a notion, if he'd got to missing Cairo, could have gone back and fallen down before the king and asked his forgiveness, and since he was the king's son by adoption, probably been forgiven. It says if you want the things you've left behind bad enough, go back and get them. But lots of people have made the choice to live for God because they're looking for something ahead. Becky will come back to the piano. I wish that a lot of people could make their choices today and make them stick. I was teaching in Sunday school class this morning about the abiding life, believing into Jesus. And the Greek word for abiding means to stay put. Meno is the Greek, it means to stay put. No, zoalpeo is the Greek word for, that's the Hebrew. It means to stay put. And talked about the church as a body, a human body, and how each one has a part and a part to do. choices. I don't know why if I'd have thought about it, I would have waited until a bunch of these folks got back that are gone, because some of the very ones I wanted to hear it are not here. Had they been here, I'd have probably gone into it a little deeper than I did this morning. But it is on tape. And I'd like to say, especially to young parents, or to parents with young children, you better watch out, because you've got somebody watching you beside God. It's a little pair of